Greetings. I'm Sean Powell, president of Eastern New Mexico University in Roswell, New Mexico. The branch campus here is celebrating Constitution Day today. I'm going to start with the preamble of that Constitution. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our property, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. In 2004, Congress passed legislation establishing Constitution and Citizenship Day. This is a federal holiday commemorating the ratification of the U.S. Constitution on September 17th, 1787. Today marks the 234th anniversary of this historic event. This year, due to COVID-19, we are re-airing our Constitution Day recognition from 2020. Hopefully next year, we will again be able to hold a face-to-face event to recognize Constitution Day. Thank you for watching.
Hello and welcome to Eastern New Mexico University Roswell's Constitution Day 2020. My name is Russell Baker and I am the director of the Success Center. I am pleased to be your host for today's program. Because of COVID-19 restrictions, we are not able to celebrate Constitution Day on campus this year. As you can now tell, this will be a virtual event. All presenters for today's program will be practicing social distancing and sanitation protocols. Please allow me to briefly discuss today's agenda. We'll be starting with opening remarks, and then Todd DeKay will be talking about or presenting the First Amendment. It's worth talking about, a great pun. Ms. Nika Najafova will be discussing voting rights amendments to the U.S. Constitution. Mr. Romo Villegas will be discussing citizenship. And Nika will be back on to do constitutional trivia through Kahoot. And then I'll discuss the wonderful essay competition. And then I'll have some concluding remarks. Why are we here? All educational institutions that receive federal funding are required to observe Constitution Day. It is important to take pause and reflect on the importance of the Constitution in our daily lives. Our program today is designed to focus your attention on the importance of certain aspects of the Constitution in this election year. Now to our first speaker. Mr. Todd DeKay currently serves as Executive Director of Institutional Research. He holds a bachelor's degree in political science. He also has a master's degree in history and education as well. At the college level, he has taught courses in Western Civilization, New Mexico history, university studies, and entrepreneurial studies. His title of his presentation will be The First Amendment It's Worth Talking About. Mr. DeKay, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Russell, for that fine introduction. And I'm just going to start with the beginning. The First Amendment, it's worth talking about. What does the First Amendment say? The First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press or the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for a redress of grievances. At this point, we have a short video, about 1 minute and 53 seconds. It's from a U.S. senator. This was on the C-SPAN website. And I think this person does a good job explaining the importance of the First Amendment and discussing something that I think is really important when it comes to free speech is dignity. The First Amendment is about dignity. And it will be starting in just a second. As I said, here's the C-SPAN website where you can find this as well. And I encourage anyone that is interested in anything related to the Constitution to visit the C-SPAN website. There's a lot of great educational resources there. There's also lesson plans for instructors.
The whole point of America is the First Amendment, And the whole point of the First Amendment is that no matter who you love and no matter how you worship, we believe in America that everyone is created with dignity. This is a fundamental American tenet. It's why this country was founded. And because we're all created with dignity, none of us have the right to dictate the conscience commitments of other people. The freedom of the conscience is a fundamental American belief, and thankfully politicians have no business policing that. At the end of the day, there are really just two kinds of societies. There are societies that are about force and power, and there are societies that are about persuasion, about assembly, and about love. And for more than 230 years, we've decided in this country that we're the latter. We are a community of persuasion, not primarily a community of power and force. In America, we don't think the center of life is defined by government. We think the frame of life is defined by government. Abraham Lincoln, often sort of apocryphally summarizing George Washington, used to talk about the silver frame and the golden apple. In America, the government is just the silver frame. It's the structure that defines the framework for ordered liberty so that the golden apple, the good, the true, and the beautiful, the things that you love and that you want to build, you go do by persuading people to join with you in a cause. Government doesn't define the center. Washington, D.C. is not the center of American life. Washington, D.C. is supposed to be a servant community that exists to maintain a framework for ordered liberty, guards us against enemies, foreign and domestic, so that your household and your neighborhood and your place of worship can be the center of life.
Once again, what are the 5 freedoms the First Amendment protects? The First Amendment protects freedom of speech, which is the main point that I want to talk about today. But it also protects freedom of religion, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, and the right to petition the government. These are guaranteed rights. There's no legal age you have to reach to exercise your First Amendment freedoms. They are guaranteed to you the day you're born. There's also no citizenship requirement for the First Amendment protection. If you're in the United States, you have the freedom of speech, religion, press, assembly, and petition. And it's for everyone. The First Amendment is neither left-wing or right-wing. It can be used to push for social and political change or to oppose change. The First Amendment is for everyone. The First Amendment protects us against government limits on our freedom of expression, but it doesn't prevent a private employer from setting its own rules. The First Amendment prevents government from requiring you to say something you don't want to, or keeping you from hearing or reading the words of others. Even if you never speak out yourself, you have the right to receive information. The First Amendment is number one for a reason. Without the First Amendment, religious minorities could be persecuted, the government might well establish a national religion, protesters could be silenced, the press could not criticize government, and citizens could not mobilize for social change. Certain speech, of course, is not acceptable. Anything related to child pornography, perjury, blackmail, incitement to imminent lawless action, true threats, solicitations to commit crimes, and plagiarism of copyrighted material. When you think of free speech, what images come to your mind? Keep in mind, it's not just the speech that you like. People have the right to say things that you feel are wrong or unjust. As Senator Sasse argued, none of us have the right to dictate the conscience commitments of other people. Hate speech is not illegal in the United States, and Americans oppose hate speech laws, but say hate speech is morally unacceptable. So while we think it is that it is wrong, we don't want to make it illegal. That's how important we think free speech is. Here's a picture of some demonstrators, and they may have signs that you agree with or you disagree with, but they have the right to assemble and show these signs. Here's a picture of Martin Luther King and the March on Washington. And today, this is looked at as an honorable thing. At its time, it was a very controversial event. Here's an individual before a group of people that are definitely opposed to him, but these people in the background have the right, as well as anyone else, to express their views. This is a picture of Cesar Chavez, who was a advocate for workers' rights and agricultural rights. And this is an individual that is a Native American that is against the pipeline, and they're protesting against it. This is just from the other day at the U.S. Open. This is a picture of Naomi Osaka in the final she honored Tamir Rice, a 12-year-old African-American boy who was shot dead by a white police officer in Cleveland, Ohio in 2014. Minority opinions, given time, sometimes become universal opinions. If you believe everyone is created with dignity, as championed by Senator Sassy, you have the right to speak out when you see indignity, but you also have the right to remain silent. You even have the right to argue about what dignity means. And when you're speaking, when you're expressing your thoughts and feelings, I encourage you to do it with dignity toward others, and also treat others, because every person is special. And the First Amendment overall truly defines America. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Our next speaker is Nika Nadjavova. It currently serves as Director of Academic Advising. She has a BA and MA from political science from West Texas A&M University. As a fellow graduate from the same program, we had some of the same professors, probably about 20, 25 years apart, but that's okay. She currently teaches Introduction to Political Science and State and Local Government, which I believe are New Mexico Common Core classes. So those looking for some classes in the spring, this is a kind of a sneak peek preview of Ms. Nadjavova's talent and abilities. The title of her presentation is Voting Rights Amendments of the United States Constitution. Nika, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Russell. Thanks for that introduction. All right, good morning, everyone. So today I'd like to talk to you a little about the voting rights amendments to the U.S. Constitution. And I think the timing for it is very important just because we have an election that's coming up. Before I go into the amendments, I'd like to talk to you just a little about the Constitution and why these amendments have been necessary for the Constitution. So I'm sure that a lot of you have heard that the Constitution is oftentimes being referred as a living, breathing document. And the reason for it was because the Constitution has changed throughout the history to accommodate the transformations that have taken place in the American society. It has changed and adapted to our country's needs to better serve our citizens. The Constitution was written as a dynamic document, flexible, so it can change with the times instead of maintaining a fixed meaning. Judges and lawmakers mold its various provisions to fit the needs of the day. So before I go into the amendments, where this comes in place, the reason why these amendments were made to the Constitution was because they wanted to accommodate the changing American society and all of the changes that have been made and the transformation that have been made to the American society with these amendments. The four amendments that I'd like to discuss today are the 15th Amendment, the 19th Amendment, the 24th Amendment, and the 26th Amendment, and of course the Voting Rights of 1965. So the 15th Amendment, in my opinion, is one of the most important amendments that have passed in the U.S. Constitution. The 15th Amendment was passed in 1870, and it granted African American men the right to vote. The amendment also said that the states cannot deny any person the right to vote based on their race. Section 1 of the 15th Amendment states, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, and previous conditions of servitude." This was a huge step for the newly freed African American slaves. Now you have to keep in mind that back in the day, before the 15th Amendment was passed, the majority of the population in South were made out of African Americans, and these people did not have the right to vote. With the passage of the 15th Amendment, a large portion of the population of southern states finally had the right to vote. Unfortunately, though, the passing of the 15th Amendment did not immediately guarantee the right to vote to African Americans. And this was due to the Jim Crow laws that prevented African Americans men from voting due to various technical reasons. It took about 10 years after the 15th Amendment was passed that African American men could finally vote without facing any discrimination. Now that the African American men had the right to vote, we still had another large portion of the population that were still denied their rights to vote. And this portion of the population are women. Women were not allowed to vote all the way up until the 1920 with the passage of the 19th Amendment. The 19th Amendment prohibited the states and the federal government from denying the right to vote to citizens of the United States on basis of gender. This amendment granted all women the right to vote, including African American women. There were many women that protested for their right to vote, and finally all of their efforts resulted in the passage of the 19th Amendment. These women are often referred to as suffragettes, and it's thanks to their efforts that all women today have the right to vote. Going to my next slide, now that we've established the right to vote for African American men and for women, there was still another large portion of the population that could not vote. And this population referred to poor people. The poor people were denied the right to vote simply because they could not afford to pay poll taxes. And at the time, poll taxes were required to be paid in order for a citizen to vote. However, the 24th Amendment made it illegal to collect poll taxes or made it illegal to discriminate against poor people that could not afford to pay taxes. And therefore, with the passage of this law, people could vote no matter if they were poor, rich, regardless of their economic situation. So this enabled another large population of the United States the right to vote. The next slide that I would like to mention is the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Even though the 15th Amendment and the 19th Amendment and the 24th Amendment were passed to give rights to people to vote, there were still a lot of technical issues that were preventing people from voting. And with the Voting Rights Act of 1965, all of this came to an end. Signed by President Lyndon Johnson in 1965, the Voting Rights Amendment was designed to enforce the voting rights guaranteed by the 14th and the 15th Amendments. The Act secured the right to vote for racial minorities throughout the country, especially in the South. This prohibited any voting discrimination, and it got rid of the literacy tests, Jim Crow laws, and other tactics used and made voting a right for all Americans. Now, even though this is not an amendment to the U.S. Constitution, it was a major step in the right direction to enable all of the citizens of the United States to vote without being discriminated against. And the last amendment that I'd like to discuss today is the 26th Amendment. And this amendment was very important because it passed during an especially important time. So the 26th Amendment passed in 1971, and this amendment lowered the voting age from 21 to 18 years old. The amendment was passed in 1971, during the Vietnam War. And during this war, about 600,000 18 to 20-year-old men were drafted to fight in a war that was imposed on them by a government that they were not even allowed to vote in. And this resulted in mass protest, a rallying cry of old enough to fight, old enough to vote. And this demonstrated the need to lower the voting age from 21 to 18 years old. That way, men that were 18 to 21 had the right to vote and had the right to influence the government in passing laws that benefited them. And I think that's all I have.
Fantastic.
Okay, thank you.
Our last speaker today is Mr. Romo Villegas. He's our criminal justice instructor. He holds a Bachelor of Arts from Mexico State University and a Master of Science from Capella University with a specialization in criminal justice. He teaches many of our criminal justice courses and political science courses as well. He's currently teaching our American National Government course, which is also a Common Core general education requirement, and by default, that makes him our residential constitutional scholar. Mr. Vegas, thank you for joining us. He'll be discussing women's suffrage.
Thanks, Dr. Baker. I appreciate it. So I think you got some good idea from Nika that you had. We're talking about our amendments, and obviously our amendments are very, very important. It started a long time ago, late 1780s. We're trying to figure out a Bill of Rights so we can do what we need to do. But I think there's something that's probably a little bit more important that has to do with our women's suffrage. Okay, and so we talk about Citizens' Day. It's very difficult to talk about Citizens Day and not talk about the women's suffrage in the last, the 100 years that it took them to get their votes right. Okay, so let's talk at the very beginning. There was what's called the Prudence Crandall. Okay, she was born in 1803, and she was probably the earliest credibility information that we can actually call it a women's suffrage at that time. So when she got a little bit older, she educated herself and decided that open up a women's school, okay? A ladies' school, as it were, back in the day. And so she did swimmingly. Everything was fantastic, right up until that Prudence decided to have a black girl, to educate her inside her, at her school. So that was a bad deal for them, because I think we should understand that our country was founded on by men, white men back in the day. So we're talking about that at that time. So that didn't go well. So along with maybe the word is anti-women, some would say at the time. So because of that, they decided they put too much pressure on Prudence, and so eventually she had to move back to Illinois, and she had to shut down her school. But the point is that she tried. So she began this suffrage and say, hey, look, we're women too. Okay, because you understand that we are not very good at the beginning about women. And so we can start very, very early. You can actually think about a little bit of misogyny involved in that, right? Because we're talking about, we have women and we put them on this, a type of pedestal back then. They're beautiful and they're fragile, and that we, it's something that we could possess back in the day, right? We're talking about the late 1700s, early 1800s. And so, but that is just simply not true. Okay, so obviously there was a movement that began because of these early pioneers. They started the demand for citizenship. Okay, not citizenship because they were born here, but full citizenship, including the to be equal rights in way, shape, or form. Okay, so it began this process with women to decide, hey, we need to vote. Okay, so we talk about abolitionists, we talk about against slavery. It's very difficult to make those decisions without a women vote. Okay, so the women just said, you know what, we need to do what we need to do. This is our part. Okay, because back then, remember, they're not supposed to be in the public. They're not supposed to be in the public service out there, right? Especially politicians. They're not supposed to be in the public view. And so they began to challenge that. So I'll tell you about a few women that you need to understand, and you're welcome to look it up if you can. So we'll talk about Frances Willard, Florence Kelley, Lucretia Mott, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. You'll hear her name in a few minutes. And so they began starting this World Anti-Slavery Convention in London. Okay, so they went to London about this anti-slavery, and then they brought these ideology and this galvanized group back to the United States and said, hey, look, we need to start attacking this so we can get our votes, right? And so let's fast forward to 1848. We're talking about the Seneca Falls, New York. Okay, that's the Women's Right Convention. It was very important, and actually they had about 100 people that showed up. Understand that was about 75 were women, but they did have 23 or 25, maybe 30 men that went to that convention. So it's a big deal. So you'll hear, I think that's very important, at that early time was called the Declaration of Sentiments. Okay, the Declaration of Sentiments was based on the Declaration of Independence. It was written by Elizabeth Stanton, that I mentioned her before, okay, and really it's just an idea about their rights that they should have because they're women, right, and that they weren't getting that before. So I have a list right here, and I'll show it to you right now. This is the list of the men and women who signed off on that Declaration of Sentiments, okay? So look it up, it's very important, but it's just a plight for equality at that time. So let's continue, move on. Let's fast forward. In 1850, they started to galvanize and get together and start having these organizations. So we're talking about 1849. We talk about the first citizen constitution in California that extends property rights to women. So now there's having a few things that they're able to grasp on. So now they're starting to have some traction, right? To be able to do what they need to do. Okay, the end result for them at that time was voting rights was a big deal. All right, and so let's talk about 1850. There was a Worcester. They also had the Second National Women's Right Convention as well. So that went quite swimmingly, and they continue on as we go. So 1852, you'll understand a few things like Uncle Tom Cabin, things of that nature that are very serious at the time, because women were involved not only in their plight to get their vote. The important is that they were also good reformists, and they were good with abolitionists, okay? And specifically anti-slavery as well, okay? So they continue on. Obviously, the Civil Rights happened in 1860, 1861, and so that the suffrage kind of stopped right up until 1865, and then after that, then they picked it right up with the same. You'll hear Elizabeth Stanton over and over and over again. That's her, okay? Susan B. Anthony, you probably know who she is as well. She was part of that movement. You should know in 1868, we moved forward. They started, devised some publications, right? And so they were printed publications called The Revolution, okay? And I'll tell you, on this publication, it said very simply, men, their rights and nothing more. Women, their rights and nothing less. Okay, and so that was in 1868, so you understand that they were moving with that. And so as we move a little bit forward, okay, 1868, we talk about the 14th Amendment, okay, with citizens and voters, right? But the problem with the 14th Amendment is that it didn't include women. They're just talking, the 14th Amendment just talks about men. And so we continue fighting. So the 13th, obviously, slavery was abolished at the time and from the 13th Amendment, right? And then we continue to move on to the 14th Amendment says, okay, it's exclusive male, right? So when we talk about that, it's a big deal. So as we continue forward, and I know it's have to do 100 years in this time period with 5 minutes or 7 minutes, but you should understand that that plight was continued on forever and ever and ever, right? And so they worked hard as they can. They galvanized, had as many people involved. They got into public life, and begin to move on. And so lastly, as we continue, we need to understand, I think that's very important. You heard that Nika was talking about the 15th Amendment, okay? And so the 15th Amendment was obviously before the 19th Amendment, okay? So the 15th Amendment says that you can vote, okay? But understand the 15th Amendment was only for men, and it was not for women. So it took another 40 years before we got to the 1920s, right? The 1920s, and in 1920 with the 19th Amendment that says women vote, okay? So here's the problem that we'll have with that amendment, the 19th Amendment, is that it still does not say women are able to vote, okay? It just says based on their sex, okay? But we already talked about that earlier because the only sex that they're talking about back in the day was men, okay? So we still, even though we gave them their rights, okay, we still have this strange relationship with the word women to be involved in politics, okay? And so understand that's very important. So let's talk about Citizens Day. So if it took women 80 years-ish, 100 years we'll say from the beginning to then, 1820s to 1920s, okay, to get their votes. Okay, how difficult it is for our citizenships that come from our country here and try to become citizenship of the United States, okay? So we think it's gonna happen right away. Understand that the plight is long, it's arduous, and some people quit, okay? All I'm here for you is stay the course, okay? So hope you enjoy your Constitution Day. If you get a chance, there's some great documents on women's suffrage on YouTube. Sometimes they're 4 or 5 minutes, sometimes they're 20, 25, or 30 minutes, and hopefully you get some really good information about what they did and what they actually did for all these 100 years to be able to get their rights to vote. Okay, enjoy it. Enjoy your Constitution Day. Thanks for having me, and I appreciate it.
Thank you, Mr. Hayes.
Thank you.
Awesome.
All right.
Next on the agenda is Constitutional Tree with Your Kahoot. I apologize to Nika. I did not get the proper technology organized for that event, so we're going to go ahead and go to the next part of the agenda, which is the essay competition announcement. We're excited to do this year. This is part of our co-curricular aspect of the program. We're going to ask students to submit a small 250-word essay. The winner will receive a $50 ENMU-Roswell bookstore gift card. All other submissions will be placed in a raffle for a chance also to win a $50. So if you just try, you have a chance to win a $50 gift card. The deadline to submit the essay is 12 noon on September 25th, and the instructions will be below, and I'll have this posted on the Success Center website and also be distributed across campus. Only currently enrolled ENMU-Roswell students are eligible to participate. The essay prompt was to watch this event. If you're not watching now, obviously you can watch a recording of it. They'll be on 2 social media platforms, Facebook at the Success Center, and on YouTube as well, the Success Center YouTube webpage as well. Key component is to watch Mr. Decay's presentation, the First Amendment is worth talking about. The essay topic will be, the First Amendment to the United States Constitution addresses a number of important topics: religions, speech, press, assembly, and petition. How does this amendment offer both protections and challenges in a diverse America during a presidential election year? It's a great topic. I look forward to reading some of your essays. I've also listed the essay requirements. To enter your essay, you submit an essay to Success Center at roswell.enmu.edu. The essays will be blind judged by the ENMU-Roswell Political Science faculty, which will be Ms. Najafova and Mr. Villegas. All entries will be scored on the following criteria: strength and logic of the argument, organization of the argument, and quality of writing. The essay winner will be announced on Tuesday, October 6th at 2 o'clock on the Success Center Facebook page, and the drawing for the gift card for all entries will take place at the same time. If you have any questions, please call me at 575-624-7246 or email me at russell.baker@roswell.enmu.edu. In conclusion, I hope everybody in the viewing audience has enjoyed today's program. As a reminder, the recording of this event will be available on the Success Center Facebook and YouTube pages. Students, I encourage you to reflect on the topics discussed today and submit an essay. These rules I just discussed will also be posted once again on the Success Center ENMU-Roswell webpage. I'd like to thank all our selected faculty and staff for taking time this morning and sharing their expert knowledge with us. So thank you again to the stars of the show, Mr. Todd Decay, Ms. Nika Najafova, and Mr. Romo Villegas. Without a dedicated, energetic planning committee, this event would not have happened. Members of the Co-Curricular Assessment Committee took lead in planning and presenting today's event. I'd like to acknowledge these people for all their behind-the-scenes work: Kimberly Andazola, Keegan Bain, and James Edwards. Special thanks to Eileen Romero for designing the promotional flyer, and once again to Donna James for giving my late submissions for posters and having these posters printed in an expeditious manner. Hopefully next year on September 17th, we will be back together on campus again to celebrate Constitution Day 2021. Until then, take care of yourselves and each other. Goodbye.